Alright, YouTube, there's a lot of meme posting online lately about the concept of Antarctica because, of course, John Kerry went there. Newt Gingrich, supposedly, I guess, is taking a visit. And other world leaders. They're all hopping on down to Antarctica right in the wake of, I think it was Buzz Aldrin posting that picture of, like, the mountain that kind of looks like a pyramid saying, oh, we're all in grave danger and stuff. People were, like, all fucked out about that. Now, I can explain what's happening in Antarctica in quite simple terms. What's happening in Antarctica is that a large amount of the ice on the fringes of the continent is starting to slide off. When it does, it's going to leave behind bare rock. The continent has begun to thaw. When that happens, you have no conception of how much mineral and energy wealth is in the continent of Antarctica. We look at Antarctica, all we see is the surface, which is just ice. We say, well, there's nothing there. You know, you'd have to drill through 2 miles of ice to extract any resources. The little bit that's already thawed, they found a bit of coal. They've found a few minerals here and there, but nothing of any real significance. The continent of Antarctica was once temperate in the past. It has just as much mineral wealth, certainly, and probably as much energy wealth as any other continent. But none of it has ever been tapped, so it's far, far more abundant. Some of it is probably very close to the surface in large pockets. It's probably worth trillions of dollars, all told. If you knew that Antarctica was slowly thawing out, and that all of those minerals and all of that fuel was going to soon potentially be available for extraction, and you had the ability to do so, would you not post armed guards down there like they've done in Antarctica, some of these stations, and attempt to create a defensible zone where you could extract that material and claim ownership of it? Of course you would. If you had the ability to do so, you'd say, I want a slice of that pie. It'd be like going back several thousand years to when none of the gold or iron veins or any of this other stuff on the face of the earth, the salt mines or whatever they happen to be, had ever been touched by man, and how abundant and easily obtainable some of that wealth would be. It'd be like going back into prehistory and mining resources out there. It would be a lot easier, it would be a hell of a lot cheaper, especially with modern technology. And in an area that is virtually pristine, it's been coated with massive sheets of ice for a long time. It hasn't been drained of resources. There are probably all sorts of resources in Antarctica that we don't know anything about. There could be a lake of oil in the middle of Antarctica worth, 10 Texases or something like that in its total monetary value. And we wouldn't even necessarily know. Now, I ask people rhetorically, why do you think they send these bores down into the ice and the underlying mineral layers? Do you think that they're just trying to look at ice core samples, or do you think they're analyzing stuff from the rock below too? Of course they are. Of course they're analyzing the rock. The other point would be, we now know there are some extinct bacteria that have actually been revived from, for instance, the Russian permafrost. What happens if this ice begins to slough off and around the edges of the continent, locked away under ice for so long, perfectly preserved? Some sort of virus comes forth and wipes out half of humanity. That's a very real concern. Now, we think now about the idea of like a space virus. People went to the moon, they brought back a disease, everybody died, and we relegate it to science fiction. But at the time that we were actually sending people into orbit, sending them up onto the moon very early on, these people were put into total quarantine the second that they landed. It was the first thing on everybody's mind. Don't you get out of that fucking capsule. You're going into quarantine for like a month. Because they thought that it was a possibility. Even if the possibility wasn't a certainty, they still wanted to take precautions. What do you think they're trying to do down there in a continent that's been locked away under protective ice for so long? There is the possibility that some virus, some bacteria, some spore, or something like that, that's been locked away from millions of years ago, is still present there and still viable because it's basically been in cryogenic state. And so naturally they want to probably try to keep that from getting loose. They're still busy building their doomsday bunkers, so to speak. We have massive cracks appearing on the ice in Antarctica. It is melting, that is true. Climate change argument aside. It is thawing out. There's wealth there, and there's also potential danger there. It makes perfect sense that they'd be guarding these locations. As for Buzz Aldrin, I believes, tweet there with the pyramid-shaped mountain and the warning of being in danger. That is an allusion to that, The Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. Almost certainly. I think it was probably meant to be a joke. Unfortunately, many people in the current generation have never read At the Mountains of Madness or listened to an audiobook of it or whatever. And so they have no idea about Lovecraft's own ruminations on the Antarctic continent and what you might find there with the Elder Ones getting thawed out and then dissecting a scientific party and their dogs for fun. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Why wouldn't you try to guard all that wealth? The wealth alone would be a reason to have troops there, let alone the possibility of the risk of contamination by some million-year-old virus that we don't have any immunity to. Yeah, I mean, it just makes sense. If it can happen in the Siberian permafrost, it can sure as hell happen when a couple miles of ice snap off the edge of the Antarctic continent. The bacteria are there. Whether they can infect mankind, whether there's any actual danger there, remains to be seen. But it's possible. Additionally, there could be all sorts of seeds and spores and things that could be useful to mankind down there too. They don't want that contaminated. They don't want people down there that aren't lockstep in the scientific method fiddling around down in Antarctica, potentially contaminating these sites. They could be literally worth more than any mineral wealth you could possibly imagine. The cure for cancer could be sitting there in the form of a seed that's laid dormant for several million years down somewhere in the ice of Antarctica. Why the hell wouldn't you want to safeguard that? So that would be a simple explanation as to what's happening down there. No, I don't think that there are literal Elder Ones or crashed spaceships and things like that down there. You might, however, I will say this, you might find that perhaps there are some archaeological remnants somewhere near the edge of the continent from some time ago. It's possible. They'd be Stone Age. There wouldn't be very much there, but yeah, it would be priceless. To science, it would be absolutely priceless. It'd be like the holy grail of science. That'd be guarded too, I would think. Then there's the possibility, and it's vague. We do know the Nazis did indeed sail U-boats down through the region of Antarctica. They mapped out New Swabia and so forth. It's possible that they managed to find, through the Kriegsmarine, a way under the ice, and they could have stashed all sorts of goodies there. From a literary perspective, from the perspective of someone who's interested in literary history, art history, yeah, there could be a repository that's very much like the Nazi gold and the Nazi art of Switzerland down there. It is possible, and as long as there's even a vague possibility, I don't think that there's like a Nazi city under the ice. But there could be little repositories of treasure under the ice in some of these tunnels. Now let's say they suddenly get exposed. They drilled into the rock, made a little cave to protect it from the sliding of the ice over time. And they just fucking buried a bunch of art and gold and shit there. Yeah, you'd probably want access to that. You probably wouldn't want it to degrade and be forgotten. You probably wouldn't want some other culture getting a hold of it, because as far as history goes, it'd be massive. It'd be a massive find. No matter what's actually found, you find so much as one fucking German coin from the Second World War down there as evidence that they made it under the ice. Oh, well, there you go. Massive conspiracy confirmed, I suppose. They probably don't want private individuals confirming it for security reasons as well. They want to save face. It makes perfect sense that they would have troops down there on the ice and on the fringes of the Antarctic continent that are semi-arable in a roundabout way. There are a few species of plants that live in a very small zone of Antarctica where there are, I believe, 2 permanent settlements, as well as all of these scientific stations. Another reason is it costs a lot of money to set these stations up and to look for resources, do testing, and so forth. They probably want to have a backup plan in case the ice starts cracking and one of those stations is about to slough off into the ocean and become part of an iceberg or something like that. An iceberg the size of Rhode Island. Another possibility, and the last one I'll mention, is that they have reason to believe that a massive shelf of ice is about to dislodge, causing a massive tsunami, and they want to monitor it for strategic purposes, for the protection of some of the shoreline areas of the southern hemisphere of the world. Because if you got a large enough piece of ice suddenly slamming off into the ocean, yeah, it'd probably cause some difficulties. It'd probably cause a tsunami or something like that. Maybe Lake Victoria, maybe the sort of ice dome over that's about to collapse. You know how much of a seismic event that would cause? how much weight would be collapsing at once and what it would do to this world. The whole continent of Antarctica would be shaking like a bell, and yeah, it'd probably cause a few problems of its own. If only for scientific purposes it makes sense to monitor the Antarctic continent. It's pristine. It's virtually untouched by humans. It could pose risks. It could also hold wealth beyond your wildest dreams. There could be a seam of gold running halfway around the continent, right on the surface, 100 feet wide. You wouldn't even know it's there. It's possible that it is. It could be the literal El Dorado. And whoever grabs it and holds it and makes it clear that it's theirs, can you imagine the wealth? You just go there with you wouldn't even need mechanized equipment. You go there with a pickaxe. You take a couple of swings, grab out a chunk of gold. You've done your day's work. You just made 100 grand. I would think that that'd be something that people would want to defend. That's about all. Peace out.